Well, Jesus is at it again, eating with those pesky tax collectors and sinners. And surprise, surprise, the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling about it. They don't like that he's eating with these people that they despise. But these tax collectors and sinners, well, they aren't really that anymore, are they? Because they have found Jesus. In fact, right before we get to today's gospel lesson, Jesus says, "Let anyone with ears to hear listen." And then the very next line is, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near." You see, these tax collectors and sinners, well, they were heeding Jesus' words. They were listening to what he had to say, and they were following him. And in the meantime, they are an example of what it means to ask for forgiveness and to amend one's life to the will of Jesus. These people, after all, that the Pharisees and scribes were appalled by, they were the very people that were actually getting it. And so these parables that Jesus gives, well, they aren't really for the sinners and the tax collectors that he's eating with so much, but they're for the people who are standing around and criticizing them. This fellow, he welcomes sinners and eats with him, they scoff. It's almost as if Jesus is trying to say, well, yeah, shouldn't you be doing the same thing? But of course, instead of just saying that, he tells them a few stories, a few parables. Which one of you wouldn't go after your lost sheep and then celebrate upon finding it? Which one of you wouldn't search for a lost coin and then rejoice and celebrate when you found it? And so, as in many of the parables of Jesus, we have to stop and really think about who we are in the story. Because it's often that we aren't necessarily who we'd like to be in the story. And so after we stop and think about that, we have to figure out what these stories are telling us. So maybe this morning, maybe we relate to the sheep and to the coin, lost themselves, separated from God until Jesus comes along in search of them, until Jesus finds them, the one lost sheep of 99 that he had been searching for. And then in his unconditional love, he heaves them onto his shoulders to carry his tired but found sheep home. Now, that's probably the most common interpretation of this parable. It's a nice one. I do like it. I love the knowledge that no matter what, when we are lost, Jesus goes out searching for us himself. I love the image, the reality of Jesus putting the exhausted sheep on his shoulders to carry home back to the flock where he will be welcomed back with love and unconditional re-acceptance. I love it. Because it reminds us that no matter what, when we screw up, when we sin, when we wander off, whether from the flock or from God or from both, well, it reminds us that we will be missed. It reminds us that our absence is noticed and that it's painful. Because to God, when one is lost, a piece is missing. And when a piece is missing, God is not whole. There is so much joy in the return of the one, much more than in all the rest that are already there, not because the rest aren't important, but because when one is missing, God is missing something. When one is missing God, it cannot be whole. But maybe we're supposed to relate to the shepherd this morning. The shepherd who so values that one lost sheep that he does whatever he can to find it and to bring it home to the 99 others. Maybe we are supposed to go out and search for the lost among us. You know, this week when I was preparing for my sermon, as I was reading and praying and researching, I couldn't stop myself from thinking about 9/11 as I was contemplating the lost this week. 9/11 was, after all, the first memorable kind of event for my generation. You know how everybody, there's those events in history where those who are alive, they remember where they were when it happened or where they found out. We find that we seem to remember kind of really specific details about those moments in our history. Well, this was the first of those types of things in the life of my generation. I was in 6th grade science class. I remember it distinctly. A TA ran into our classroom in tears and she turned the TV on. And then we all watched together in horror as the plane flew into the second building. I imagine a lot of you can think right now of where you were when you saw that happen. And then right after that, the screen on that TV went black. Our teachers had turned it off, perhaps to shield us from the loss, perhaps because they knew that our little 6th grade brains would have too many questions that they couldn't answer or that they didn't really want to have to. And so it felt like they sighed in relief when parents started showing up to take their kids out of school. I remember that day vividly. I was not taken out of school, and so I got home off the bus to my dad and my brother standing in front of our kitchen TV watching the news. Our trip to the Braves game would no longer be happening that afternoon. My mom, who was away on business, wouldn't be making it home that night. And the TV would stay tuned to that channel all night. It wouldn't change to the sitcoms we watched or Jeopardy that we watched during dinner, but it would stay on the news throughout the evening. Because so many lives, so much loss. Much more than my 6th grade mind could even begin to comprehend, as reports of more attacks and more attempted attacks were coming in, with all of us leaning on the counter, eyes glued to that television set. But then, almost immediately, among all of the despair, started to come some stories of hope. Those ferry boats that headed to Manhattan to get people away, the first responders who charged upstairs knowing they probably wouldn't make it out, the churches and other religious communities nearby that turned their buildings into rest areas or meal places for those searching for the lost and for those found. Because searching for the lost was the immediate reaction. It's just what you do. So it was the thing that our country came together to do immediately. And then those who couldn't help or in the actual searching, they found ways to do what they could to support others. And if you recall, it started to give us hope. Neighbors stayed in the driveway to talk a little longer to each other. Our country banded together to support one another. Our leaders promised to continue to search for solutions. So many times since, I've heard people say that it was the most unified our country has ever been. When we came together in the aftermath to search for the loss and to figure out how to move forward together. Something had gone terribly wrong. Our people were hurting, our people were missing, and so we searched. Just like the shepherd in Jesus' parable, who upon realizing that he had lost just one sheep, went out looking for it. You see, maybe we are supposed to see ourselves as the shepherd in this one. Maybe Jesus is calling us to go out and to do the searching. Because God's people are lost. God's people are hurting. So what if Jesus is really sending us out into the world to seek those who need so badly to be found, to seek the vulnerable and those people who need to feel God's love the most? What if Jesus is sending us out to give people hope, to seek out those whom we have somehow lost and forgotten in the day-to-day grind of our lives? You see, Jesus is trying to explain to the Pharisees that those sinners and those tax collectors that he's eating with, well, they could never completely be separated from God. They had just been lost somewhere along the line. They had been neglected or pushed out, or they had thought maybe that there was no other way. Something happened along the line and they had just gotten lost. But they were found now. They were right there at the table with Jesus. In fact, some of them would go on to become Jesus' most faithful followers, all because someone had gone out and sought them when they were lost, all because Jesus recognized the value of every human being, not the value of what they possessed or the value of what they could offer or the value of what they could do for him, just the value that they held innately as the beloved children of God. And once he found them, he rejoiced. They all rejoiced together because that is something worth celebrating. It was as if the 99 were so utterly incomplete without that one lost sheep. It was like a piece of the puzzle was missing. You know that feeling when you take an old puzzle out of the box and you work and work and work on it, only to get to that final piece and find out that it has gone missing. All of that work to finish that puzzle, and then you can't. And what's worse, maybe you were the last one to do the puzzle. And you somehow, as you were putting it away in its box and back on the shelf, somehow you lost that puzzle piece. So much more frustrating, isn't it? When part of the flock is missing, when even just one sinner is lost, God feels that absence because we are the people that make up God's world. And like a puzzle, if just one piece is missing, it cannot be finished. If just one of us is missing from God, God's world cannot be complete. So then we have to think, if we are willing to see ourselves as a shepherd in this story, what does that mean? Well, it means that this parable is not just about being found when we stray. It isn't just about us, but it becomes more about others. It becomes more about bringing others into the life of Christ and into the good news that we live for. It means searching out those whom we have hurt, those whom we have neglected or we have forgotten, and welcoming them back into the fold of God. It means going out of our doors today and seeking out the poor and the hurting and the hopeless. And it means picking them up and carrying them home. In the same way that we did all of our power to come together to find the lost on that horrible September day, we are called to seek those who are missing from our community today. Those we have through neglect or forgetfulness or hate or by accident lost. Those who are not here. And so we seek to find the destitute in our world. We seek the hurting and the distraught and the lonely. We seek those who have lost their faith and those who maybe we have pushed away. We seek those who have lost hope so that we can all sit at the table with Jesus together, so that piece by piece, that puzzle can come together, that it can be completed. Because only once all of the sheep are accounted for, only once we seek out all of the lost among us, only then can we truly rejoice together with Jesus. Amen.